Hello, everyone. A warm welcome from Delphi Forum. My name is Nefeli Lygerou. Let's get underway. Our topic today is Germany's foreign policy after Merkel. Soft power champion or change, of course. Let's see. To help us navigate through this rather complex issue, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Daniela Schwarzer, Executive Director for Europe and Eurasia for Open Society Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us with a wealth of leadership experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
We have 15 minutes ahead of us, and we need to be really punctual regarding the time. So let's start. Before we look ahead to the upcoming elections and the new era after Merkel era, could you sum up her legacy? And what a legacy it is, 16 years.
Well, if we go back to the year 2005, when Angela Merkel became German Chancellor, the world really looked very different. Since then, Germany's role in Europe and in the world has increased quite a bit. Europe went through a number of very serious crises. If we remember, first of all, the financial and sovereign debt crisis built into Europe in the year 2008, and then the sovereign debt and banking crisis that put Europe and the euro under very important pressure as of the year 2010. That was really the time when Germany's role changed in Europe. It was seen, first of all, for its economic and financial power. It was seen as a potential veto player in designing the rescue packages, for instance, for Greece, but also for other countries. And it was heavily criticized for its slowness on some issues and for the insistence, together with the International Monetary Fund, but also with the European Commission, on the conditionality that was imposed on countries. And in that situation, Merkel had to strike a delicate balance between taking into account the resistance within Germany and the need to act in a European sense of solidarity to hold the Eurozone together. And I think one of the takeaways from that time was that Germany had a very, very strong self-interest to actually be part of the solution to this crisis, because Germany's economic model depends entirely on the single market, a stable euro, but then also its outlook on the world more globally. And so if I had to review in particular that point, how it went, I think in the end, Germany was part of the solution. It in some moments went too slow, but I think one of the failures here was to take along the German public in a much broader way to explain why we are not actually helping Greece or Spain or Ireland, but we are acting in our very own self-interest. And this debate, of course, came back when the Recovery Fund to alleviate the economic consequences of the COVID-19 crisis was negotiated in spring last year. And just to build the bridge between those two incidences, Angela Merkel did move Germany and Europe quite far with preparing the compromise together with Paris on the Recovery Fund. And in two ways, Germany really accepted something that years back would have been quite difficult for at least the national audience to accept. And that is, first of all, the sheer volume of the Recovery Fund, along with the fact that it's not all loans, but there are actual transfers which don't have to be paid back. So this sort of the kind of financial help and its volume. But then also the funding of the Recovery Fund, because what happens is that the EU goes to the market to get the money from the markets. And this kind of European bonds, in my view, is a very important step forward for the European Union. It's not a new instrument, it was there before, but to be used on the scale with the support of the member states, I think is crucial. So for Europe, I would say those, and then there's the migration crisis where Germany took a lot of leadership in welcoming refugees, but then also faced the tensions that this caused within the European Union. And here, I think the most important consequence was the divide between the Western European and the Eastern European perspectives on the matter. I think one can, again, with the example of the migration crisis, argue that Germany came quite late because the pressure that Greece, that Italy, that Spain, and other countries felt was there well before Germany in the end and other countries acted. But once it did, it really tried, along with the European Commission and others, to move the EU forward
So it was
to
effective.
have a more responsible migration policy.
So it was effective. Germany's approach was effective.
I would say it was effective, but it was also confronted with increasing tensions within the European Union. So if you ask me for the baseline of Germany's approach to Europe, it has been to keep the EU together and to keep the Eurozone together. And it had to learn over time. Sometimes the answers were, they were developed in a pro-European way of thinking on the German side, but the reactions were pushbacks or little acceptance among the member states. So German diplomacy did spend a lot of time trying to hold East, West, and North and South together. And that way we are all still there in one union. So I would say this was an important contribution, but not only by Germany. Of course, the Brussels institutions play a huge role. Other countries play a huge role as well.
Let's talk about the new German Chancellor will also face challenges to another key institution of Germany's national security, NATO. Let's talk about that. The next day after election, Germany and NATO.
Germany is expected to increase its contribution to NATO. As we all know, the NATO partners agreed to spend 2% to reach the 2% spending goal, and Germany hasn't quite reached it, although it has been moving in that direction. Depending on the composition of the government, this will be an important debate, because if the Greens come into government, of course, defense spending from a Green perspective is not necessarily the top priority to tackle, but NATO partners want to know very soon where Germany stands. The other big challenge is, of course, that NATO is going through strategic discussions, and in particular on China. And also there's a general within the European Union and within Berlin for a solution how to strategically interact with Russia coming forward. So I think the general NATO and transatlantic context is a big issue that the new government has to tackle very soon.
You talked about Russia, and that's very interesting. After Merkel's departure, do you think that Berlin will have a difficult time with the topic, with keeping this balance? It's a difficult balance.
It is a very difficult balance, and the new German government will be faced with the question what to do with Nord Stream 2, which is the new pipeline bringing Russian gas to Germany. The current government first took the position that this was a business project and politics had nothing to do with it, but of course it's not true. And more recently, even when pressure came more from the United States under Donald Trump, but still under Joe Biden and in particular from Congress, German policymakers are indeed in a delicate situation to decide how to cope with it. I believe the new German government will also be faced with expectations to take a position, will the construction be completed? But then there's also the next question, if they stick to the completion of the project, will it actually be used in the way it was planned? But I would like to sort of draw the perspective on Russia a little larger. The next government has to, along with its European and American partners, take a clear strategy towards Russia, but also the eastern neighborhood of the European Union. Mm-hmm. Russia is interfering in a number of countries, as it is also in EU countries. And what we need to do together as Germans and Europeans and Americans is really push back on Russia's interference with democracies. And this is really a pressing issue because we may see something of that kind ahead of the German elections and ahead of the French elections, which come up in spring 2022.
Do you think that in Merkel's absence, there is a chance the EU will become less German-centered, more divided, and even cacophonous?
Merkel is definitely a very important person as people who have observed European Council meetings or bilateral meetings, in the sense of having a lot of political experience, really as the longest serving head of state and government in the European Union, and a lot of political clout, and a very strong credibility because of her expertise, because of her calmness, because of her focus, and also her capacity to really stand through very, very long negotiations and not give up if she decides an issue is important. But of course, there are also other very talented and strong policymakers. But the question is whether the new government will move into its role as the largest EU country, the largest European economy, fast enough and be operational and outreaching to other partners quickly enough so this can actually, so the change of government in Germany doesn't lead to a kind of break in the system. Not that it's breaking up, but a pause. So I think that's one challenge. And the other one is that the new government needs to find a working relationship with France. And as I said, there will also be elections in France. So there is a need really to reach out very quickly, because much of the efficiency of the European Union depends on whether the leaders actually get on well with each other, have enough trust, and find a constructive way of exchanging.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. It was a very interesting discussion for a very interesting new era. Thank you so much for your participation, Daniela Schwarzer. Thank you so much.
Thanks to you.